My daughter was holding a drawing she'd made for her grandfather's coffin when the gate agent decided our boarding passes weren't valid. She didn't cry. She just looked at the paper in her hands and then looked up at him and asked, "Is it because we look different?" I had no answer, but the man standing behind us did, and he had been waiting 8 months to give it. My daughter was holding a drawing she had made for her grandfather's coffin when the gate agent decided our boarding passes were not valid. She did not cry. She just looked at the paper in her hands and then looked up at him and asked, "Is it because we look different from the people you let through?" I had no answer, but the man standing behind us did, and he had been waiting 8 months to give it. My name is Naomi Clark. I am a 4th grade teacher from Memphis, Tennessee, and I need to tell you about the morning everything changed, not just for my daughter and me, but for 23 other families who never knew each other's names. It started the way most things do. Quietly. Ordinary. A Tuesday morning in November, with a carry-on bag, and a 7-year-old who had not slept well, and a grief so fresh, I had not yet found the bottom of it. My father, Joseph Clark, had passed 2 days before. Not suddenly. He had been sick for a while. But there is no version of losing your daddy that feels like something you were ready for, no matter how much time you had to prepare. My daughter, Lily, who was small for her age and serious in the way that some children just are, had spent the night before our flight making him something. She would not let me see it until she was done. When she finally unfolded it from her lap and held it up in the kitchen light, I had to press my lips together and look at the ceiling for a long moment. It was a drawing of the two of them, her and her grandpa, standing in a field of sunflowers, both of them grinning, both of them holding hands. She had written along the bottom in her careful 1st grade print for Grandpa. So, he has something to look at. She folded it in 4ths and tucked it into the front pocket of her little jacket. She planned to place it in his hands at the viewing. I did not have the heart to tell her that might be complicated. I figured I would find a way to make it work. The drive to Dulles was quiet. Lily fell asleep against the window. Before we even cleared the city, her jacket pulled up around her chin, the corner of the folded paper just visible above the pocket edge. I drove with the radio off and thought about my father's hands and the things I had not said, and the long drive from Washington down to Jackson, Mississippi, where my mother was waiting with a house full of relatives and a grief much older and much heavier than mine. We arrived at the airport with time to spare. Security went fine. We found gate D9 without trouble, joined the boarding line, and I remember thinking I actually thought that the hardest part of the morning was already behind us. The gate agent's name was printed on the small badge pinned to his uniform jacket. He was perhaps 30 years old, with the practiced disinterest of someone who had decided long before his shift started that this job was something he was doing rather than something he cared about. He scanned the boarding passes for the 2 people ahead of us without looking up. When Lily and I stepped to the counter, he took both passes from my hand and ran the first one under the scanner. It beeped. He ran it again. It beeped a second time. He looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "I'm going to need to hold on to these for a moment," he said. "There's a verification issue." I had flown this airline many times. I knew what my ticket said. I had booked these seats 11 days ago on a Wednesday night, sitting at my kitchen table after I got off the phone with my mother and understood that the time was running short. I had paid for them with money I had been setting aside. "What kind of verification issue?" I asked. He did not look up. "System flags. I need to run these through the secondary check." "We have a connecting timeline," I said. "My father passed away. We're going home for the service." He still did not look up. "Ma'am, I understand. I'll get to it as quickly as I can." But he set the boarding passes on the counter to his left, not in the scanner, not on the keyboard, just to the side, the way you set something down when you are not planning to pick it up again right away. Lily had been standing beside me, one hand tucked into mine. I felt her fingers tighten. The line behind us was growing. I could feel the weight of it, the shuffling, the shifting, and the particular kind of exposure that comes from being watched while something is being done to you that you cannot stop. I kept my voice level. I said, "Sir, those seats are paid for. I have the confirmation number, if that would help." He said he would get to it. He began speaking to a colleague at the next station about something entirely unrelated. 2 minutes passed. Then 3. Lily released my hand. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the folded drawing. She did not unfold it. She just held it in both hands and looked down at it, the way you hold something you are afraid of losing. Her face was completely still. She was not performing. She was not trying to make anyone feel anything. She was a 7-year-old child who had made something beautiful for her grandfather's funeral and was starting to understand in some quiet part of herself that not everyone who held a uniform held it the way it was supposed to be held. I wanted to take the drawing from her. I wanted to fold her against my side and block out everything in that terminal except the two of us. Instead, I stood straight and kept my eyes on the man behind the counter and waited. Then, I heard a movement behind us, deliberate, unhurried. The sound of someone stepping out of line who had decided without announcement that they were done waiting. A man stepped out of the boarding line behind us. I did not know his name yet. I did not know why he was there. I only knew he was looking at my daughter's hands, at the drawing she was still holding, and that he had not looked away. He moved the way people move when they have already made a decision and are simply carrying it out. No hurry, no performance, no announcement that something was about to change. He was somewhere in his late 50s. I would guess solidly built with close-cropped gray at his temples, and the kind of unhurried bearing that does not come from money alone, but from years of knowing exactly what kind of room you are in and exactly where you stand in it. He wore a dark travel jacket over a simple collared shirt, and he carried a laptop bag over one shoulder with the casual ease of a man who had been in more airports than he could count. He stopped beside us at the counter, not behind us, not across from us, but beside us, and looked at the gate agent the way you look at something you have been expecting. Lily noticed him first. She turned her head and studied him with the direct, unself-conscious attention that 7-year-olds bring to everything they find important. He glanced down at her briefly, and something in his face shifted, not pity, not performance, but something older and quieter than either of those things. He gave her a small nod. She gave him one back. "Excuse me," he said to the agent behind the counter. His voice was calm and even, the kind of voice that does not need volume to carry authority. "Is there a problem with this passenger's boarding passes?" The gate agent, whose badge read the name Brad Simmons, though he had not introduced himself to me once, in the 4 minutes he had been holding my documents, looked up with the particular expression of a man who had been comfortable in his position until about 30 seconds ago. "Sir, this is a ticketing matter. If you're not involved in this transaction, I'd ask you to wait in line." "I am involved," the man said simply. He did not explain further. Brad's jaw tightened. "These passes have flagged for secondary verification. It's a standard procedure." "How long has that process been running?" Brad glanced at the screen. "A few minutes." "How many minutes?" A pause. 4, maybe 5. The man set his laptop bag down on the counter beside mine with a quiet, definitive sound. He unzipped the front compartment and removed a slim laptop, opened it, and set it on the surface between himself and the agent. The screen came to life immediately, displaying a document I could see from my angle that it was dense with text and what appeared to be a formatted table, but I could not read the specifics from where I stood, and the way he positioned the screen made it clear the contents were not intended for general viewing. "Not yet." He looked at Brad. "What's your name?" "Brad Simmons." The man looked at the screen briefly, then back at Brad. Something in that exchange, the brevity of it, the fact that he did not write anything down or type anything, but simply looked, seemed to unsettle the agent in a way that the question alone had not. Brad shifted his weight. His hand moved toward the boarding passes on the counter and then stopped without touching them. "My name is Marcus Webb," the man said. "I'd like you to run those passes through the scanner." That was the moment I learned his name, Marcus Webb. It meant nothing to me then. I did not know his history or his position, or the folder of documents on his laptop that I would later understand had been months in the making. All I knew was that he had stepped out of a boarding line to stand beside a woman and a child he had never met, and that he was speaking in the particular tone of a man who was not asking. Brad looked at the laptop screen again, at the document title visible at the top, which I could not read, but which, based on the way the color shifted in his face, told him something he had not expected to learn this morning. He pulled his eyes away and straightened his shoulders. "Sir, with respect, this is a gate procedure matter, and—" "Run the passes," Marcus said. 2 words, flat and final, and completely without malice, which somehow made them heavier than anger would have. The line behind us had gone very still. I could feel the attention of the people waiting, not hostile, not restless, but present in the way that public witnesses become present when they understand that what they are watching is not a delay, but a situation. Lily had been quiet through all of this, standing at my side, with the drawing held in both hands. I do not know what made me do it in that moment. Something in the particular quality of her stillness. Something in the way she had been holding that paper since Brad had taken our boarding passes and set them to the side like they were something he could decide the value of. I reached into my coat pocket and took out my phone. I found the voicemail. I had not been able to bring myself to delete the last one left 4 days before my father passed, when his voice was already thinner than I remembered it being, and every word cost him something. I crouched down beside Lily and held the phone so she could hear it. I pressed play. His voice came through the small speaker, rough at the edges, but unmistakable. He said her name once, the way he always did, drawing it out, the way grandparents do when they mean it as a whole sentence and not just a word. He said he was looking forward to seeing her. He said he was proud of her for being such a good traveler. And then, at the end, in the way of a man who knew his words were going somewhere important, he said, "Tell my Lily I'll be waiting at the gate." The voicemail ended. The terminal did not go quiet. Terminals do not go quiet, but in the immediate radius of our gate, the background noise seemed to recede the way it does when something has taken up all the available attention in a space. Lily listened to the whole thing without moving. When it was done, she straightened up slowly to her full height. She turned and looked at the man behind the counter with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not accusation, but a kind of simple, unshakable certainty that belongs only to children and to people who have already decided they have nothing left to be afraid of. "My grandpa said he'd be waiting," she said. Her voice was clear and steady and carried to every person standing within 20 feet of that gate. "Please don't make him wait longer." Nobody spoke. The silence that followed my daughter's words did not last long. Silences like that never do. But it lasted long enough for something to shift in the air, in the people standing around us, and most visibly in the man behind the counter, who had spent the last several minutes managing a situation he believed he controlled. Marcus Webb let it breathe for exactly 3 seconds. Then he spoke. 8 months ago, he said, a passenger was turned away from this gate. Same airline, same route. Similar reason given a verification issue that required secondary processing. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. He spoke with the measured precision of someone who had rehearsed nothing because he did not need to. That passenger filed a complaint. The complaint was reviewed and closed within 48 hours. No action taken. No follow-up conducted. Brad stared at him. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You were working this gate that morning," Marcus said. November 14th, 6:47 a.m., departure to Jackson, Mississippi. The color in Brad's face did not drain dramatically. It shifted the way light shifts when a cloud moves across it, gradual then suddenly complete. "I process hundreds of passengers," Brad said. "I can't be expected to remember." "I'm not asking you to remember," Marcus said. "I'm telling you what the footage shows." There it was. That word footage, and the way Marcus delivered it, without emphasis, without theatrics, the way you mention something that has simply always been true and will continue to be true, regardless of what anyone in the conversation believes about it. I watched Brad process that word the way you watch someone realize they have walked into a room they cannot walk back out of. The people in line behind us had stopped pretending they were not listening. The couple nearest to us, a woman in a camel coat and a man with a rolling duffel, had gone completely still. Farther back, a young woman with earbuds had removed one of them without seeming to notice she had done it. Nobody was moving along. Nobody was checking their phone. Marcus reached into the front pocket of his jacket and took out his phone. He did not dial immediately. He looked at Brad first. "I'm going to make a call to station operations," he said. "Before I do, is there anything you'd like to tell me about why these boarding passes have been sitting on that counter for 6 minutes without being scanned?" Brad's hands moved to the counter surface. A reflex, not a decision. "The system flagged them." I told her. "The system flagged them," Marcus repeated. "And in 6 minutes, you have not attempted to clear the flag, contacted a supervisor, offered an alternative resolution, or provided this passenger with a reason she could verify. What you have done is set her documents to the side and wait." He paused. "That isn't procedure. That's a choice." The word landed the way his words tended to land, quietly and with significant weight. He made the call. 2 sentences. His name, the gate number, and a request for station operations to send someone immediately. He ended it and slipped the phone back into his pocket without changing his expression. Brad had gone very still, in the particular way of someone who understands that the room has reorganized itself around them, and that their earlier confidence was based on an assumption that no longer holds. He looked at the laptop sitting on the counter, the one Marcus had opened and positioned, without ever turning the screen all the way toward him. Something in his expression told me he had been trying to read the document header since Marcus had set the machine down, catching only fragments, and that the fragment he had finally managed to piece together was not the one he had hoped for. He had seen enough to know the name of the airline at the top of the page. His airline, and beneath it, in the kind of formal document structure that appears in legal or regulatory contexts, a date range that began 8 months ago. "What is that?" he asked. His voice had lost its earlier edge. What was underneath it was not anger. It was something closer to the particular unease of a man who has spent months operating inside a system he believed would absorb whatever he did, and is only now beginning to suspect that someone has been watching the system from the outside. "That," Marcus said, "is why I'm here." He turned the laptop slightly, not to show Brad the full contents, but enough to make clear that the document was substantial, organized, and real. Brad looked at it the way people look at things they were hoping would turn out to be less than they are. I had not moved during any of this. Lily was still beside me, still upright, still holding the quiet composure she had carried since the voicemail ended. I put my hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into it slightly, just enough for me to feel the warmth of her through her jacket. The woman in the camel coat behind us exhaled through her nose. Not a laugh, not a comment, just the sound of a person releasing something they had been holding. The man with the duffel shifted his bag from one shoulder to the other. 2 college-aged young men near the gate window exchanged a look that required no words. Brad looked from the laptop to Marcus, to me, and back to Marcus. His mouth opened and closed once, without producing anything useful. He had run out of procedure to hide behind, and what was left was just a man standing in a gate that was being watched from more angles than he had understood when his shift began. Marcus straightened his jacket with one hand. He did not look satisfied. He did not look angry. He looked like a man finishing a task he had started a long time ago and had every intention of completing properly. Then, at the far end of the D-concourse corridor, I heard footsteps, quick, purposeful, the sound of someone who had received a call and understood immediately what it meant. I looked up. A supervisor appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving fast. The moment she saw the man standing at our gate, her face changed entirely. She covered the length of the D-concourse corridor in under a minute, which told me she had not walked from a nearby office, but had come from somewhere with intention. The kind of arrival that happens when a name has been spoken into a phone, and the person who heard it understood immediately that speed was required. She was a black woman in her mid-40s, trim and composed in the Navy uniform of station management, with a badge that read, Patricia Odom Gate, Operations Supervisor. She had the bearing of someone who had managed difficult situations in public spaces long enough to have developed a specific face for them controlled, unreadable professional. That face lasted until she was about 10 feet from our gate and got a clear look at the man standing beside us. Then it changed. Not dramatically, not with any performance. It changed the way a person's face changes when they walk into a room they were not expecting to find, occupied by someone specific, a small, involuntary recalibration, the eyes going slightly wider before the composure reasserted itself. She finished the last few steps to the counter and stopped. "Mr. Webb," she said. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness had weight in it now. "I wasn't aware you were traveling through Dulles today." "I wasn't advertising it," Marcus said. Patricia looked at me, then at Lily, then at the boarding passes still sitting on the counter where Brad had placed them. She looked at them the way a person looks at something they wish was not there. Not because they did not want to see it, but because seeing it confirmed something they had been hoping would not need to be confirmed. She picked them up. She ran the first one under the scanner herself, without asking Brad for the device, without explanation, without ceremony. The machine beeped once clean, immediate the sound of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. She ran the second one. Same result. She set both passes on the counter in front of me and looked up. "These are valid," she said. "Both seats, fully paid, no flags in the system." I had known they were valid. I had known it for the 11 days since I booked them, and the 40 minutes since I had walked into this terminal, and the 6 minutes since Brad had set them aside. Knowing a thing and having it said out loud, in public, clearly, and without qualification, are not the same experience. My throat tightened in a way I had not expected. Lily reached over and took the passes from the counter herself and held them against her chest. Patricia turned to Marcus. Something in her posture shifted, still professional, but the kind of professional that is making a real-time calculation. "Is there something I should know about this morning?" she asked. The question was careful and deliberate, the way questions are when the person asking them already suspects the shape of the answer. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "My wife's name was Eleanor." The non sequitur hung in the air for exactly as long as it needed to, before it resolved into something else entirely. 3 years ago, he continued, his voice even and unhurried. She was on her way home to Birmingham to be with her mother, who was very ill. Her flight was delayed 4 hours. No mechanical issue, no weather. The delay was procedural, the kind that gets processed through a system and documented as operational necessity and never reviewed by anyone with the authority to question it. He paused. She did not make it in time. Her mother passed before her plane landed. The gate had gone quiet in the way that spaces go quiet when something true has been said in them. Eleanor spent the last month of her life asking me to do something about the gaps in passenger protection that allowed for what she had experienced. She said that what happened to her was not a single bad day. She said it was a pattern she had felt her whole life in airports and waiting rooms and offices, and that the only difference between her experience and the experiences of people who never spoke up about it was that she happened to be married to someone who had the access to do something. Marcus looked down for a moment, then back up. She was right. I should have started sooner. I did not know what to say. I did not say anything. There was nothing I could have added to that would not have been smaller than the thing itself. Lily was looking at Marcus with the particular stillness of a child who has understood something in the way children sometimes understand things, not through analysis, but through some direct interior channel that bypasses the need for explanation. She did not speak either. She just held the boarding passes against her chest and watched him with her grandmother's eyes. Patricia had listened to all of this without interrupting, When Marcus finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she turned. She turned slowly and deliberately, the way people turn when they have made a decision and want everyone present to understand that it is final. She looked at the gate agent, at the man who had taken our boarding passes, and set them aside, and told me it was procedure, and told the child beside me to wait while her grandfather was waiting at a gate she could not reach. "Step away from the gate," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It had the particular quality of an instruction that has the full weight of institutional authority behind it, delivered by someone who has the standing to mean it and the composure not to perform it. Brad did not move immediately. He looked at Patricia, then at Marcus, then at the small crowd of witnesses that had gathered in the way that crowds gather when they understand they are watching something that matters. His jaw was set in the way of a man who has not yet made his peace with losing, which is to say, he had not yet entirely understood that losing had already happened. He looked at Marcus. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. His voice was low-controlled, but something underneath it had come loose. "You think you're helping, but you don't understand how this works." Marcus met his eyes without any particular emotion. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he said. "I've known for 8 months." The 8 words Patricia had spoken. These are valid. Both seats, fully paid, were still in the air when Brad made his last attempt. "There are protocols," he said. His voice had gone thin, in the way of a man reaching for ground that is no longer there. "Passenger verification is a standard." Brad, Patricia said his name the way you say a name when you want a person to understand that the conversation they are trying to continue has already ended. She held out her hand, palm up, the gesture unmistakable. He looked at her hand. He looked at Marcus. He looked at me just briefly, just once. And in that look was something I had not expected to see there. Not contrition, not shame. Just the hollow, recalculating expression of a man who had spent a long time believing that the system he operated within would always catch him before he fell, and had only now understood that the system had been watching him fall for quite some time. He unclipped the badge from his jacket. He placed it in Patricia's hand without a word. The gate area did not erupt. There was no applause, no outburst, none of the dramatic release that happens in the kinds of stories where justice arrives with fanfare. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways more powerful for being quiet. The woman in the camel coat, who had been standing in line long enough to hear everything, let out a slow breath and looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way people do when they have been holding something and are finally allowed to set it down. The 2 college-aged young men near the window exchanged a second look, this one different from the first. Less surprised, more settled, the look of people who have watched something resolve the way it should have resolved from the beginning. The older man, who had been standing near the back of the line, the one who had shifted his duffel from shoulder to shoulder during Marcus's exchange with Brad, stepped forward half a pace. He did not say anything directed at anyone in particular. He just moved forward, and the small repositioning of his body communicated everything it needed to. Patricia directed Brad toward the operations corridor with a few quiet words I could not fully hear. He went. He did not look back, which I think was less about dignity and more about the fact that there was nothing behind him worth looking back at. I became aware that I had been holding my shoulders somewhere near my ears for the better part of the last 15 minutes. I let them drop. The physical relief of it was more significant than I expected. Marcus closed his laptop and returned it to his bag, with the same unhurried efficiency with which he had produced it. He did not make a speech. He did not accept any acknowledgement from the people around us, several of whom were watching him with expressions that ranged from gratitude to something closer to awe. He simply zipped the front compartment of his bag, straightened up, and looked at our luggage on the floor beside the counter. Without asking, without announcing, he picked up my carry-on by the handle and lifted it as though the act required no more thought than holding a door. He also picked up Lily's small backpack from the floor where she had set it when the whole thing began and held it in his other hand. "I know," he said before I could object. "It's already done." There are moments in airports, in all public spaces, really, when a small, practical gesture carries more weight than it has any right to carry. A man picking up a bag is a man picking up a bag. Except that it was not. It was a man who had just spent 45 minutes working to restore something that should never have been taken, completing that work with the quietest possible punctuation. I did not have words for it. I did not try to find them. Lily had been standing at my side through all of this watching. When Brad disappeared into the operations corridor and the gate began to settle back into its ordinary rhythms, the boarding announcement resuming the line. Beginning to move again, the terminal reclaiming its ambient noise, she reached into the front pocket of her jacket with both hands. She took out the drawing. She looked at it for a moment, at her grandfather's face, at her own, at the sunflowers she had drawn between them, and the words along the bottom in her careful first-grade print. Then, with the particular deliberateness of someone performing a private ceremony, she folded it along its original creases once, twice, and tucked it back into her pocket. She did not look toward the operations corridor where Brad had gone. She did not look at any of the faces watching her. She simply patted the pocket once with her small hand, as if to confirm the drawing was safe, and then she looked up at me. "Can we go now?" she asked. "Yes, baby," I said. "We can go." Patricia handed me our boarding passes with both hands, which was not necessary for the exchange of 2 pieces of paper, but which felt, in the context of the morning, like its own kind of statement. "I'm sorry for the delay," she said. The apology was plain and personal, offered without corporate language or protective distance, and I accepted it the way you accept something that cannot undo what it is responding to, but is still worth receiving. We boarded. The premium cabin was quieter than I expected, lit with the warm, even light of a space designed to make travel feel manageable. The conductor, a woman with a calm professional warmth who introduced herself as she showed us to our seats, made a point of asking if we needed anything before the doors closed, and the asking itself felt different from the way asking had felt at the gate, like it meant what it said. Lily took the window seat and pressed her palm to the glass. Marcus settled into the seat across the aisle and placed both bags in the overhead compartment with quiet efficiency. The doors closed. The plane began to move. And for the first time since leaving the house that morning, since the kitchen and the drawing and the drive through the dark with Lily asleep against the window, I became aware of the weight of the envelope still sitting at the bottom of my bag. There is a specific kind of quiet that settles over you after something difficult has passed. Not peace, exactly, and not relief exactly, but the strange, hollow stillness of a body that has been running on adrenaline and has only just received permission to stop. That was what the first 10 minutes in the air felt like. The plane had lifted off the runway at Dulles with the smooth, unhurried confidence of machinery that does not know or care what happened in the terminal it just departed from. Below us, the Virginia suburbs spread out in their November, gray, bare trees, in subdivisions, and the long gray ribbon of the highway carrying its ordinary Tuesday morning traffic to its ordinary Tuesday morning destinations. None of it knew anything about Gate D9. None of it was aware that my daughter had stood at a counter and said something true in a clear voice, and that a stranger had been waiting 8 months to make it mean something. Lily had the window seat, which she always did when we flew, not because she was particularly interested in geography, but because she liked to watch the ground disappear. She had her face turned toward the glass, now her breath making a small, intermittent fog against the surface. Her jacket was still zipped to the collar. The front pocket where the drawing lived rose and fell with her breathing. Marcus Webb had taken the aisle seat across from us. Not the middle seat, which would have felt presumptuous, but the one directly across close enough for conversation, if conversation was wanted, and far enough to make clear that his presence was not an imposition. He had his laptop bag stowed overhead and his hands folded on the tray table in front of him. He was looking at the middle distance, the way people look when they are not resting, but are giving the appearance of it thinking something through, or sitting with something, or both. The cabin around us had settled into its cruising rhythm. The couple 2 rows ahead had already opened a crossword between them. A businessman near the front was reviewing documents with the focused intensity of someone who had decided that 40,000 feet was the appropriate altitude for quarterly reports. The flight attendant, a tall woman with an efficient, genuine warmth, came through with the beverage cart and asked Lily whether she wanted juice or water. Lily asked for apple juice and said thank you, with the careful enunciation she used when she was around adults she was not sure about yet. When the attendant moved on, Lily turned from the window and looked at Marcus. She studied him for a moment in the way she studied everything directly, without the self-consciousness that most people develop somewhere around age 9 or 10 and never entirely lose. Then she said, "Did Eleanor like flying?" Marcus looked at her. Something moved through his face. Not pain, not quite, but the expression of a man touching something that has long since stopped being sharp and has become instead a constant familiar weight. She preferred trains, he said. She said you could watch the whole country go by without being 30,000 feet above it. Lily thought about this. My grandpa liked trains too. Is that so? He said you could see where you were the whole time. She looked back out the window at the clouds, which had closed in below us, now making the ground invisible. I think he would have liked the window seat. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think he would have. I had been listening to this exchange. With my hands around a cup of hot water, the flight attendant had brought, without being asked, apparently, I had looked like someone who needed something warm, which was accurate. The conversation between my daughter and this man had the quality of something that had not been planned by either party and was all the more real for it. Lily had a way of arriving directly at the center of things, not because she was trying to be profound, but because she had not yet learned the social habit of approaching important things sideways. I reached into my bag for my phone. My husband David, who taught high school history in Memphis and who had dropped us at the airport before his first period class and had been waiting for any word since, had sent 3 messages in the time between boarding and now. The first asked if we had gotten through security. The second said he was thinking of us. The third was a photograph of our kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a sticky note that read in his handwriting, "Tell Lily her grandpa was the best man I ever knew." I typed back, "We made it on. Tell you everything later. Kiss the cat for me." He responded within 30 seconds with a photograph of our Tabby Winston, looking deeply unimpressed at the camera. I set my phone face down on the tray table and felt something loosen in my chest, just slightly, just enough. There are people whose presence helps even when they are not present, and David was one of those people for me. Lily had turned back from the window. She was not looking at Marcus anymore. She was looking at my bag, which was stowed partway under the seat in front of me, with the top unzipped the way I had left it when I took out my phone. The envelope was visible, just barely, just the corner of it white against the darker fabric of the bag interior. She had seen it. I could tell by the particular quality of her stillness, which was different from her ordinary stillness, in the way that deliberate silence is different from absence of sound. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Her voice was quiet enough that only I could hear it, and steady, in a way that was older than 7 years had any right to produce. "Mama," she said, "the envelope. Open it." I had carried that envelope for 6 hours before I touched it. It had arrived at the house. The morning of our flight slipped through the mail slot, sometime before 5 a.m. My father had sent it days earlier, before the final turn, when he still had the clarity to fold a piece of paper and address it in his own hand. I had picked it up from the floor by the front door on my way to wake Lily, and I had known immediately what it was. The handwriting was his. The name on the front was hers, Lily Clark, in the careful, slightly labored print of a man whose hands had been giving him trouble for months. I had put it in my bag without opening it, because I could not open it then in the kitchen, with Lily, still half asleep, and the whole machinery of departure requiring everything I had. I told myself I would open it when things were calmer. Things had not been calm until now. I reached into my bag and took it out. The paper was slightly creased from being at the bottom of the bag all morning. My father's handwriting on the front was the thing that made my throat close. Not the words, which were only a name and an address, but the particular quality of the letters, the way he had always made his capital L, with a long looping tail that curved back under the rest of the word, like a signature inside a signature. Marcus had gone still across the aisle. Lily sat straight in her seat, hands folded in her lap, not reaching for the envelope, but waiting with the patience of a child who understands that some moments require you to hold yourself still and let them arrive. I opened it. Inside were two things: a single sheet of paper folded in thirds, covered in my father's handwriting, and a photograph face down tucked behind it. He had written her full name at the top, Lily Marie Clark, which he only used when he was being serious. He wrote about the sunflowers they had planted together the summer before, and the way her laugh started in her stomach and came out surprised. He wrote that bravery did not mean the absence of fear. It meant being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. And then, near the bottom in handwriting that had grown larger and more deliberate, I want you to have the picture in this envelope. The world has always had people in it who try to tell other people where they can and cannot go. Those people have always been wrong. And you come from a long line of people who walked through anyway. I set the letter down. I picked up the photograph, black and white, printed on old paper with a thin white border faded to silver gray. It showed a young man standing in front of a building entrance, dressed in a jacket and tie. His posture straight, his chin level, looking directly at the camera. Beside the entrance, at roughly shoulder height, was a rectangular sign. The lettering was clear enough to read even through the age of the print. No colored. The young man was my father. He was perhaps 19 or 20. He was standing in front of that sign, as though he intended to walk through the door behind it, regardless of what it said. And, based on the fact that I was sitting on an airplane 60 years later, it appeared that he had. On the back, in his handwriting, 4 sentences. They told me this door wasn't for me. I went in anyway. They couldn't keep me out then. A small gap. Then beneath it, don't let them keep you out now. I did not hold back the tears. There was no reason to. I let them come quietly and pressed my lips together and looked at my daughter, who was looking at the photograph with an expression that was very still and very old for her face. I turned it so she could see it properly. She looked at it for a long time. She looked at the sign. She looked at the young man, her grandfather at 19, standing in front of something that told him he did not belong standing there anyway. She reached out and touched the edge of the photograph very gently, with 2 fingers, the way she touched things she wanted to be careful with. Marcus had seen it from across the aisle. He did not speak. He looked once, and then he looked out the window, and I understood that he was giving us the privacy of the moment, while also sharing in it the particular grace of someone who knows when to be present without being intrusive. We sat with that for a long time. The cabin moved around us in its ordinary way. None of it touched us. We were somewhere else for a while, in a field of 60-year-old sunflowers, with a young man in a jacket and tie who had walked through a door that told him he could not. By the time the captain announced our descent into Jackson, something had shifted in the cabin that had nothing to do with altitude. Lily looked up from the photograph. She looked at me, then out the window at the first pale shapes of Mississippi visible through the clouds below. "Grandpa was there too, Mama," she said quietly. "At a gate. The Jackson airport is small. The way that things built for function, rather than impression, are small, practical, unhurried, with the particular quality of a place that knows what it is and has no interest in pretending otherwise." We came off the jetway into a terminal that smelled faintly of coffee and recirculated air, and something underneath both of those things that I could not name, but that felt in the way of certain sensory details, like the specific atmosphere of arriving somewhere that has known you a long time. I had grown up making this trip. I had made it at Christmas and at Easter and for summers that stretched out long and unhurried in the way that Mississippi summers do. I had not made it like this before, arriving in the middle of a week, in the middle of November, with a reason that could not be unmade. Lily had not spoken since the plane touched down. She had reached into her jacket pocket when the wheels hit the runway and closed her hand around something there, and she had kept it closed for the duration of the taxi to the gate and the walk up the jetway and the wait at the baggage carousel. I did not ask her what she was holding. I knew what it was. The drive from the airport to my mother's house took 20 minutes through the kind of landscape that does not rush itself, long flat, stretches of road lined with pine and sweet gum, the November sky pressing low and gray above the tree line, the occasional clapboard church sitting back from the road with a hand-lettered sign out front, a gas station, a convenience store with a hand-painted window advertisement for boiled peanuts, the ordinary geography of a place that had always felt to me like the specific definition of the word home, not comfortable exactly, not uncomplicated, but known, deeply, irrevocably known. Lily sat beside me in the back seat of the cab and watched the trees go by. Marcus had taken a separate car, giving us the ride without discussion, the way he managed most things, by reading what was needed and providing it without making the provision into something that required acknowledgement. I had not yet told Lily who he was beyond his name. There would be time for that. This was not the time. I thought about my father during that drive. Not the man of the last several months, the careful, diminished version of him that illness produced, but the earlier one, the one who had stood in front of a door he was not supposed to enter and gone through it anyway, the one who had spent 60 years building a life on the far side of that door and had put a photograph of the moment in an envelope addressed to his 7-year-old granddaughter so that she would know before she needed to know it that the world's opinions about where she belonged had always been wrong. My mother's house sat on a street of similar houses in a neighborhood that had been black and working class and quietly proud for 3 generations. It was a yellow house, had always been yellow, would apparently always be yellow, since my mother had repainted it the same color 3 separate times over the decades and showed no signs of reconsidering. There was a front porch with 2 chairs on it and a wind chime my father had hung years ago that my mother had never taken down. The porch light was on even in the middle of the afternoon. She was standing at the doorway before the cab had fully stopped. May Clark was 71 years old, and she carried those years the way certain women carry them, not as weight, but as evidence. She was small and upright, with close-cropped silver hair, and the particular hands of a woman who had cooked for large families and kept large gardens and held a large number of people together through a large number of difficult things. She was wearing a dark dress with a cardigan over it, and she had the expression of a woman who had been holding herself together with great discipline for 2 days and was only now at the sight of us coming up the front walk, beginning to feel the edges of that discipline soften. Lily saw her from the end of the front walk and did not wait. She broke into a run, the full, uninhibited run of a child who is not thinking about decorum or distance or the fact that her small legs are covering ground faster than her balance entirely approves of. She covered the length of the front walk and the 3 porch steps and closed the last few feet into her grandmother's open arms with a force that rocked the older woman back half a step. May held her. She held her the way grandmothers hold children, after long distances and hard news, completely without reservation, with both arms and her whole posture, and something in the quality of her stillness that communicated without words, that this child was safe, that this place was safe, that whatever had happened between the last time and this time, here at least was solid ground. I came up the porch steps more slowly. My mother looked at me over Lily's head, and in that look passed everything that did not need to be said, the acknowledgement of what we were here for, and the relief of being here together, and the grief that was going to take a long time and could not be rushed and did not need to be named right now to be real. She reached one arm out toward me without releasing Lily, and I stepped into the space it made and let her hold us both for a moment on the front porch of the yellow house, with the wind chime my father had hung turning quietly in the November air. After a while, May pulled back just enough to look at Lily properly. She cupped the child's face in both hands and looked at her the way grandmothers look at grandchildren when they are taking a careful account of them. "Your grandpa talked about you every single day," she said. Her voice was rough at the edges, but steady underneath. "Every single day, you understand. He knew every word of every story you ever told him on the phone." Lily's face did something complicated, the kind of complicated that happens when something wonderful and something heartbreaking are trying to occupy the same expression at the same time. She reached into her jacket pocket with one hand and closed her fingers around what was inside it. "I have something for him, Grandma," she said. "Can I still give it to him?" May had answered Lily's question the only way it could honestly be answered. "Yes, baby," she had said, standing on that porch with both hands still cupping her granddaughter's face. "You can still give it to him. We'll go this afternoon." The funeral home was called Simmons and Sons, which had been serving the community for 40 years and occupied a long, low building on a tree-lined street 3 miles from my mother's house. It was the kind of place that understood its purpose and fulfilled it with quiet dignity. Dark wood paneling, soft, overhead lighting, arrangements of flowers that had been chosen for comfort rather than spectacle. The parking lot held a dozen cars when we arrived. Relatives I had not seen since the last family gathering moved in and out of the entrance, speaking in the lowered voices that grief spaces require without anyone having to be asked. We had changed clothes at my mother's house. Lily was in a navy dress with white trim that she had chosen herself and that my father had seen her wear at Easter and called his best girl in her best dress, which she had remembered and which was why she had packed it. She walked into the funeral home beside me with her hand in mine and her other hand pressed flat against the front pocket of the small cardigan she wore over the dress, confirming for perhaps the 100th time since the airport that what was inside was still there. The smell was flowers, white lilies, predominantly, with something softer underneath, something that funeral homes always have, and that I could never identify precisely, but that I associated entirely with the particular gravity of these spaces. Lily noticed it too. She breathed in once through her nose when we crossed the threshold, and her hand tightened briefly in mine. The room where my father lay was at the end of a short hallway. I knew this because I had been here before 2 years ago for a cousin. I walked the hallway the way you walk hallways in these places, slowly, with the understanding that the pace is not about the distance, but about what waits at the end of it. May walked on Lily's other side. She had not released her granddaughter's hand since the porch, and she did not release it now. Around us, relatives spoke quietly. An aunt I had not seen in 3 years touched my arm as we passed. Someone pressed a cup of sweet tea into my hand that I accepted without being able to say who had offered it. The room opened up at the end of the hallway, and there was my father. I am not going to describe what that was like in detail, because some things deserve to be private, even inside a story that has already asked a great deal of you. I will say that he looked like himself, like the version of himself that had existed before the illness, or near enough to it, and that the funeral home had fulfilled its quiet purpose, and that I stood there for a moment with my daughter's hand in mine and my mother beside us, and felt the full weight of all the years he had been my father, and all the years he would not be. Lily looked at the casket for a long moment from where we stood. Then she looked up at me. I nodded once. She walked forward on her own. She was small enough that she had to rise onto her toes slightly to see over the edge clearly, and she did this without self-consciousness, without waiting for anyone to lift her or assist her. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and took out the drawing, the one she had made at the kitchen table 2 nights ago, the one she had carried through the airport and the gate and the confrontation and the flight, and the long taxi ride through November, Mississippi. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases with her thumb, the way she had seen me smooth papers. She looked at it once, then she looked at her grandfather. Then she leaned forward slightly and placed the drawing into his hands. She took a moment to arrange it the way she wanted it. The image facing up the words along the bottom, visible with the careful, serious attention of someone completing a task that matters. When she was satisfied, she straightened up and leaned close to the edge of the casket and said something. Her voice was too low for me to hear from where I stood. It was too low for anyone to hear. It was meant only for him, and whatever it was, she said it clearly and without hurry, the way she did everything when she had decided it was important. Then she stepped back, turned around, and walked the few steps back to me and put both arms around my waist and pressed her face against my side. I held her the way you hold someone. When you understand that the holding is the only language available, and that it is in the circumstances enough. Over her head, I could see my father's hands resting with the drawing placed between them two figures in a sunflower field, both of them grinning, both of them holding hands, and the words she had written along the bottom for Grandpa. So he has something to look at. May appeared beside me. She had been watching from a few feet away, and her face held the particular expression of a woman who has witnessed something she will carry with her for the rest of her life and knows it. She put one hand on my back and one hand on Lily's and stood there with us for a moment in the quiet of that room. Your daddy would have been proud of both of you today, she said. Her voice was low and unhurried and carried the absolute conviction of someone saying something they know to be true in the same way they know their own name. I pressed my lips together and nodded because words had temporarily left me. We stayed until the light outside the windows turned orange and the shadows got long, and relatives came and went and spoke and embraced and told stories about my father that made people laugh and cry in the mixed-up way of Southern funerals, where grief and celebration are not opposites, but the same thing wearing different expressions. By the time we drove back to my mother's house, in the deep blue of early evening, the day had gone quiet, in the way that only grief can make a day go quiet, full and empty at the same time. The house had settled into the particular quiet of an evening after a hard day. Lily had fallen asleep on the small bed in my mother's back room at some point between supper and 8 o'clock, still in her navy dress, one arm curled under her cheek, her cardigan folded over the foot of the bed with the careful precision of a child who had been taught to look after her things. I had checked on her twice. Both times she was deeply, completely out the unguarded sleep of someone who had spent everything they had and trusted the world to hold still while they recovered. The rest of the house was quieter now. Several relatives had gone home. An aunt was washing dishes in the kitchen, and I could hear my mother moving around in there too. The sound of cabinet doors and running water and the low, occasional murmur of two women who had known each other a long time and did not need to fill silence with words to be in each other's company. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of decaf that had gone mostly cold, looking at nothing in particular when my phone lit up on the table beside me. The number was one I had stored in my contacts at the airport, in the brief exchange Marcus and I had had while Lily was getting settled into her seat, and the flight attendant was making her first pass through the cabin. I picked it up. I wanted to wait until you'd had time to get settled, he said by way of opening. His voice had the same quality over the phone that it had in person, measured direct, with no wasted space between the words. We're settled, I said. He told me what had happened after we boarded. Brad had been formally suspended, pending a termination review, effective before our flight cleared the runway. Patricia had preserved the gate footage from 40 minutes before departure to 15 minutes after, per Marcus's instruction. The footage covered the entire exchange, not every word he said, because the audio was not clean from every angle, but enough, combined with the witness accounts that Patricia had collected from 3 of the bystanders who had volunteered their information, Before the crowd dispersed, the record was substantial. Then he told me about the 23. He said it carefully, the way you say something to a person, when you want to make sure they understand the full weight of what they are hearing without being overwhelmed by the presentation of it. 23 complaints filed against the same gate over an 18-month period. Complaints about delays that had no operational basis, about documentation requests that were applied inconsistently, about language that passengers had described in their own words and in their own time as making them feel that they were being told they did not belong in the space they had paid to occupy. All 23 had been reviewed. All 23 had been closed, without action, most within 48 hours, a few within the same business day they were filed. As of that afternoon, all 23 had been formally reopened. I sat with that for a moment. 23. I thought about the woman who had filed the first one 18 months ago and gone home and waited for a response that told her she had been heard. I thought about what it must have felt like to receive a letter saying the matter had been reviewed and closed, and what that letter had required her to carry afterward, the particular weight of having told the truth in the right place and been told efficiently and with official language that it was not enough. There's one more thing, Marcus said. The legal team is asking whether you would be willing to give a formal written statement. It would become part of the official record. It would support the other accounts and narrow the institutional ability to characterize what happened as isolated or ambiguous. He paused. I want to be clear. There is no obligation. You have already done more than anyone could ask by being present and telling the truth when it mattered. Whatever you decide, what happened today is on record. That does not change. I looked at my cold cup of decaf. I looked at the dark window above the kitchen sink, which reflected the overhead light and my own face back at me in the way of nighttime windows. I had been asked versions of this question before, not always in these words, not always in these circumstances, but the underlying shape of it was familiar. It was the question of whether the truth you lived through was worth the labor of making it official, whether the system that had failed you would treat your account of that failure as something it was required to take seriously, or whether it would absorb your words the way it had absorbed 23 others and return you a form letter. Will it actually matter? I asked. Marcus did not answer immediately, which I respected. He was not the kind of man who reached for reassurance when the honest answer required more than that. It already has, he said. Brad Simmons will not work that gate again. The 23 cases will be reviewed by people with the authority to act on them. Those things are done regardless of what you decide. A brief pause. But yes, your statement will matter more. You were there. You saw all of it. And the record of what happened to you and your daughter, written in your own words, is harder to set aside than a summary in a legal filing. The kitchen was quiet. From the other room came the soft, rhythmic sound of the television. My mother kept on low in the evenings, a habit she had maintained for decades. Then the kitchen doorway filled. My mother, May Clark, who had been washing dishes and moving quietly around her kitchen, and it now became apparent, listening to every word of a phone conversation. She had made no attempt to pretend she was not following, stepped into the doorway with a dish towel over one shoulder and her arms folded across her chest. She looked at me with the expression she had always used when she had already decided what the correct answer to something was, and was waiting with a measured but finite patience for the people around her to arrive at it independently. Tell that man yes, she said. The relatives had all gone home by 9 o'clock, and the house had exhaled into the particular quiet that follows the departure of many people from a space that is used to fewer. My mother had made 2 cups of chamomile tea, without asking whether I wanted any, which was how she had always done things, not as a question, but as a provision, the way she had provisioned everything, for as long as I could remember. We took the cups out to the front porch and sat in the 2 chairs my father had positioned there years ago, angled slightly toward each other, in the way of chairs that were meant for conversation rather than simply for sitting. The wind chime above the door turned slowly in the November air, producing its soft, intermittent sound, the same sound it had produced for every evening I could remember sitting on this porch in every season for the better part of my life. The street was quiet. A dog, somewhere down the block, made a brief statement and then reconsidered. The neighbor's porch light glowed orange through the bare branches of the sycamore at the property edge. In the distance, a car moved along the main road with its headlights cutting through the dark, and then it was gone. I had brought the photograph out with me. I was not sure why exactly it had been in my jacket pocket since the plane, and I had simply not put it away. I set it on the arm of my chair, face up, where the porch light caught it just enough to make the image visible. My mother looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "Lord, I haven't seen that picture in 30 years. I looked at her. You knew about it." Knew about it. She let out a breath that was not quite a laugh. I was the one who took it. She reached over and picked up the photograph with the careful, two-handed grip she used for things she considered important, and she looked at it in the way you look at something that contains a version of a person you loved before you knew them, before the decades, and the ordinary accumulations of a shared life filled in the space between who they were then and who they became. "He was 20 years old," she said. "We weren't married yet. We were courting, which is what they called it then, though your father called it something less formal." The corner of her mouth moved. He had applied for a position at an office downtown. Accounting work. He had done 2 years of college by then, and he was good with numbers, always had been. The office was in a building that had not entirely caught up to the law. She paused. There was a man at the front desk who told him the position had been filled, which it had not. Your father knew it had not. He had a friend who worked in the building who had told him as much. She turned the photograph over and looked at the back, at my father's handwriting, at the 4 sentences she presumably knew by heart. "He went back the next day," she said, "and the day after that. Every morning for 2 weeks, he put on his jacket and his tie, and he walked into that building, and he sat down in the waiting area, and he asked to speak to the hiring manager. Every morning, they told him the position was filled. Every morning, he said thank you and left and came back the next day." She set the photograph back on the arm of my chair. "On the 15th day, the hiring manager came out himself. I think they had run out of other ways to make your father go away. He sat down across from your father and talked to him for 45 minutes. He hired him the same afternoon." The wind chime turned. "Your father worked at that firm for 11 years, my mother said. "He was the first. He was not the last." She folded her hands around her teacup. "He never made a big thing of it. He didn't tell the story to be proud. He told it because he thought it was useful. He said the most important thing he learned in those 2 weeks was that most doors that look locked are only unlocked from a direction that people have not tried yet." I thought about the photograph, about the young man who had stood in front of a sign and been told in the most direct language available that the space behind it was not for him, about the particular quality of will required to return in a jacket and a tie for 15 consecutive mornings. "He wrote that letter for Lily," I said, "because he knew she was going to need it." My mother looked at me steadily. "He wrote it because he knew she already had what she needed. He just wanted to make sure she knew where it came from." We sat with that for a while. The tea went warm, then cool. The street remained quiet. At some point, a light in the house across the way went dark, and the neighborhood settled further into itself. Eventually, I stood and went inside to check on Lily. She was still in the back room in the same position she had been in when I last looked, deeply asleep, one arm under her cheek. But something had changed on the bedside table. Her small backpack was unzipped, and a piece of paper had been taken from it and smoothed out and placed on the pillow beside her head, folded once. She must have done it before she fell asleep, or in some half-conscious interval I had not witnessed. I unfolded it carefully so as not to wake her. It was a new drawing. She had done it on the plane, or perhaps at some point that afternoon. In a quiet moment, I had not noticed the kind of small creative act that children perform in the margins of hard days, not as a distraction, but as a way of processing what the day has asked of them. It showed 2 figures, drawn in the deliberate, earnest style of a child who is trying to get something right. A small one and a tall one standing side by side, both of them facing forward. Between them, at the top of the page, she had drawn what was unmistakably an airport departure gate. The distinctive arch of the boarding door, the small rectangle of the scanner, even the rows of waiting chairs rendered in careful crayon lines. Underneath the two figures, in her first-grade print, she had written, "We made it, Grandpa." I stood there for a long moment in the doorway of my mother's back room, holding my daughter's drawing in the low light, and felt the full, complicated truth of that sentence settle through me. I didn't know it then, but that drawing would sit on my desk for the next 2 weeks while I tried to find the right words. Not for a eulogy, for a statement. 2 weeks is long enough to start believing that the hardest parts of a thing are behind you, and short enough to be wrong about that. I had been back in Memphis for 13 days. The school had given me the week of the funeral, and the one following it, which was more than the standard bereavement allowance, and which my principal had offered without being asked, in the straightforward way of a woman who understood that the standard allowance had been written by someone who had never actually grieved anything. I had returned to my classroom on a Monday, taught the week, and come home each afternoon to sit at my desk in the room off the hallway that served as my home office and stare at a blank document on my laptop screen. The statement had taken me 11 days to start, not because I did not know what to say, but because I knew exactly what to say and kept finding reasons why today was not the right day to say it. I recognized this for what it was. The particular procrastination of someone who understands that writing a thing makes it more permanent than simply having lived it, and who is not entirely sure they are ready for that permanence. On the 12th day, I opened the document and started typing and did not stop until I had 3 pages. On the 14th day, which was a Saturday, I was sitting at my desk, finishing the final paragraph, when the rest of the household made its way into the afternoon around me. The house, on a Saturday, had its own particular rhythm. David grading papers at the kitchen table, Lily doing her weekend homework on the living room floor, with her colored pencils arranged beside her, in the order she preferred Winston the cat, installed on the back of the sofa like a piece of decorative furniture that occasionally required feeding. David, who taught American history at the high school 4 blocks from our house, and who had the particular gift of being exactly as present as a situation required, without ever making his presence into its own event, came to the doorway of the home office at some point in the early afternoon with 2 glasses of water and set one beside my laptop without interrupting. He stood for a moment reading over my shoulder. I let him. When he finished the page I was on, he did not speak immediately. He picked up his water glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down. Then he put one hand briefly on my shoulder, the particular pressure of a hand that is saying something it trusts you to translate without explanation, and went back to the kitchen. I finished the last paragraph 20 minutes later. I was rereading the opening when Lily appeared in the doorway. She was still in her weekend clothes, a pencil tucked behind her ear in the manner she had recently adopted, apparently under the impression that this was how serious, creative people managed their tools. She looked at the laptop screen, then at me, with the expression she wore when she was deciding whether something was her business. She had decided apparently that it was. "What are you writing?" she asked. "A statement," I said. "What's a statement?" I considered the various ways to answer that for a 7-year-old and settled on the most direct one. It's when something happens to you that isn't right and you write down exactly what happened and give it to the people who have the authority to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. She thought about this with the full, unhurried attention she gave to things she was taking seriously. Like what happened at the airport. Like what happened at the airport. "So you're telling them the true story," she said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," I said. She nodded the slow, considering nod of someone processing new information and finding it satisfactory. She looked at the screen again, at the 3.5 pages of text she could not read from the doorway, and then she looked at me. Good, she said. Because it was a good story. I did not respond immediately. I sat there for a moment, with my daughter's words settling around me, the particular comfort of an evaluation delivered without qualification by someone who does not yet know how to be anything other than direct. And I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight since the airport. Since before the airport, since the morning, I had put an envelope in my bag without opening it and told myself I would find a calmer moment. David appeared in the hallway behind Lily with the quiet efficiency of a man who had excellent situational awareness. He looked at me over her head with a small, knowing expression that communicated in the shorthand of 11 years of marriage that he had heard the exchange and agreed with the assessment. "Lunch," he said to both of us, and disappeared in the direction of the kitchen. Lily followed him with the immediate decisiveness of a child for whom the concept of lunch requires no deliberation. I turned back to my laptop, scrolled to the top of the document, and read the first sentence one more time. Then I clicked Save. I reached for my water glass. On the other side of the doorway, I could hear the sounds of the kitchen, the refrigerator, opening the particular clatter of the drawer where we kept the silverware, David saying something to Lily that made her laugh in the way that started in her stomach and came out surprised. The television in the living room was still on, tuned to the news channel. David kept on in the background on weekend afternoons while he worked. I had stopped paying attention to it hours ago. But as I sat back in my chair with my water glass, something on the screen shifted in the peripheral edge of my vision. The graphics changed, the camera angle widened, and the chyron at the bottom of the screen resolved into text. I could read from across the hallway. I set my water glass down without drinking from it. On the screen, a man in a dark suit was walking through a set of wide double doors into a high-ceilinged room, lined with flags and tiered seating. He carried a leather folder in one hand and moved with the same unhurried, purposeful quality he had carried through the D-concourse 2 weeks ago. He took his seat at the long table facing the elevated panel of seated figures at the front of the room. He opened his folder. The chyron read, Passenger Rights Hearing, Senate Commerce Committee. I did not move. Marcus Webb had just walked into a room in front of the United States Senate. The Senate Commerce Committee hearing room had the particular quality of spaces designed for consequence. High ceilings, tiered seating, the measured formality of a place where words were expected to matter and were recorded on the assumption that they would. Marcus Webb settled into the witness chair with the same economy of movement he brought to everything. He placed his leather folder on the table in front of him, opened it to the first page, and adjusted the microphone with a single, precise motion. Around him, the room held the anticipatory quiet of a space waiting for something to begin. Staff moved along the walls. A photographer crouched briefly at the side of the room and then withdrew. At the elevated panel facing him, 7 senators arranged themselves with the practiced composure of people who had sat in this formation many times and understood that the work of the day was about to start. The committee chairman introduced the hearing in the standard language of such proceedings. The subject matter, the purpose, the witnesses scheduled to appear. When he introduced Marcus by name and former title, a few of the senators leaned forward slightly. Whatever they had been told in their preparatory briefings, the man sitting across from them was not entirely what they had expected. He had the stillness of someone who had no interest in performing anything which in a room built around performance was its own form of authority. Marcus began when he was invited to. He did not start with the 47 pages. He started instead with a single sentence. In the 18 months covered by the documentation I have submitted to this committee, he said, 23 passengers filed formal complaints about treatment at a single gate in a major American airport. All 23 complaints were closed without action. Most were closed within 48 hours. Several were closed the same day they were filed. He paused to let that settle. 23 people took the time to put into writing what had happened to them. He continued, 23 people trusted a system that is supposed to receive those accounts and act on them. and 23 times that system returned a form letter and moved on. He opened his folder to a tabbed section and slid a bound document toward the committee staff member, positioned to his right, who distributed copies along the panel. The documentation before you represents 14 months of investigation. It includes the original complaint, filings, the institutional responses to each the security footage, relevant to the incidents in question, and the witness accounts collected from individuals present during the most recent and fully documented occurrence. A senator at the far end of the panel leaned toward her microphone. Mr. Webb, can you speak to why these complaints were consistently closed without meaningful review? I can speak to what the documentation shows, Marcus said. The pattern of closure suggests that the complaints were being processed through a review mechanism that prioritized operational continuity over passenger protection. In practical terms, that means the system was designed to resolve complaints quickly, rather than to resolve them accurately. He turned a page. The result was that a gate employee was able to engage in what I would characterize as discretionary humiliation, the selective application of procedural delays and verification requirements to passengers based on factors that had nothing to do with their ticketing status for at least 18 months without meaningful institutional interruption. The room was very quiet. I want to be specific about what that looks like in practice, Marcus said, because I think the phrase discretionary humiliation is one that can be absorbed too easily in the abstract. He reached a tabbed section near the back of his folder. On a Monday morning, 2 weeks ago, a passenger named Naomi Clark arrived at Gate D9 of Washington Dulles International Airport with her 7-year-old daughter. She was traveling to Mississippi for her father's funeral. She held 2 valid, fully paid boarding passes for premium seats on the departing flight. The gate employee on duty withheld those boarding passes for more than 6 minutes without scanning them, without contacting a supervisor, and without providing any verifiable procedural justification. He looked up briefly, then back at his notes. During those 6 minutes, the employee made statements that multiple witnesses described as implying the passenger did not belong in the section she had paid to occupy. The passenger's daughter, who is 7 years old, attempted to correct the record. She was told in those words to stay out of grown folks' business. Several members of the panel had stopped making notes. They were simply listening. I was present at this gate, Marcus said. I observed the exchange. I have submitted my own account as part of the witness documentation. He reached the final tabbed section of his folder. I also have, with Miss Clark's permission, a recording made at the gate during the incident. I would ask the committee's indulgence to play approximately 12 seconds of it. He nodded to the staff member, who pressed a control on the equipment at the side of the room. The audio that came through the hearing room speakers was ambient with the background sounds of a busy terminal, rolling luggage, a distant announcement, the particular acoustic texture of a large public space, and then, cutting through all of it clear and steady, and entirely, without accusation, the voice of a 7-year-old girl. Is it because we look different from the people you let through? The question hung in the air of the hearing room, the way it had hung in the air of Gate D9. Complete, unanswerable in any satisfactory way, carrying in its 12 words the full weight of something that had been true for a very long time, and was being said aloud, simply, and without embellishment, by someone too young to know she was supposed to ask it differently. No one in the room spoke. The silence lasted perhaps 5 seconds. In a hearing room, 5 seconds of complete silence is a significant amount of time. In Memphis, on the living room floor of a house 4 blocks from a high school where American history was taught every day, to students who were still learning what that history meant, a 7-year-old girl was lying on her stomach doing her weekend homework. Her colored pencils were arranged beside her in the order she preferred. The television on the far wall had been background noise for the better part of the afternoon. She looked up. I had not moved from the doorway. The distance between the home office and the living room was perhaps 20 feet, and I had covered maybe half of it in the seconds since I stood up from my desk, drawn by the change in the television's audio. by something in the quality of the sound that had pulled at my attention before my conscious mind had fully registered what I was hearing. I was standing in the hallway when the recording played. I heard it from there in the same moment my daughter heard it from the living room floor. She had gone completely still. She was still on her stomach, her colored pencils still arranged in their preferred order, her weekend homework still open in front of her. But her head was lifted, and her eyes were fixed on the screen with the particular all locked-in attention of someone who has heard something that requires their full and immediate concentration. Her pencil was still in her hand, suspended an inch above the paper, going nowhere. I walked into the living room and sat down on the couch behind her. On the screen, the hearing continued. A senator was leaning toward her microphone, asking a follow-up question about institutional review procedures. Marcus was answering with the same measured precision he had brought to everything else. The technical language of the exchange had resumed filling the room with the ordinary apparatus of governmental process, and underneath all of it, still reverberating in the air of our living room, was 12 seconds of audio that had not sounded technical at all. Lily turned her head and looked at me. "That was me," she said. It was not a question. She had recognized her own voice, the way you recognize it on a recording, with the slight, disorienting surprise of hearing yourself from the outside, and then the settling certainty that yes, that is the sound you make in the world, whatever you imagined it to be. "Yes," I said. She looked back at the screen. The senator was still speaking. Marcus was still listening, with the attentive patience he brought to everything. "Why is my voice on the television?" she asked. I had been composing versions of this explanation in my head since the airport, in the way you compose explanations for children, in the margins of everything else you are doing, finding the language that is honest, without being more than they can hold direct, without being more than the moment requires. I sat forward on the couch and looked at my daughter. "Do you remember what you asked the man at the airport?" I said. She thought for a moment. "I asked him if it was because we looked different." "Yes. And Mr. Marcus, the man who helped us, he recorded that. He kept the recording because he thought it was important. He thought that the people whose job it is to make sure airports treat passengers fairly needed to hear it." I paused. "Those people are the ones on the television. They're called senators. They make rules about how airlines have to treat the people who fly on them." Lily looked at the screen for a long moment. She looked at Marcus, who was still speaking, still composed, still carrying the full weight of his folder and his 14 months of documentation and his dead wife's unfinished instructions into a room full of people with the authority to act on them. Then she sat up. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. She simply rearranged herself from lying on her stomach to sitting upright, crossed her legs, set her pencil down on the homework page, and looked at the television with the serious, full frontal attention of someone who has decided that whatever they were doing before was considerably less important than what they are watching now. She watched for a few minutes in silence. A second senator asked a question about the pattern of complaints and the institutional response timeline. Marcus answered. The camera pulled back to show the full panel. Lily watched all of it. Then she turned to me. "Mama," she said, "did I help?" There are moments that arrive without warning and ask more of you than you expect. This was one of them. I looked at my daughter, at her serious face and her crossed legs, in the colored pencils, still in their preferred order, on the floor beside her, and the homework she had set aside to watch the United States Senate consider whether the experience of a 7-year-old girl at an airport gate constituted evidence of a systemic problem that required a systemic response. I reached out and gathered her against my side. "Baby," I said, "you started it." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. Then she settled more comfortably against me and turned back to the screen, apparently satisfied. David appeared in the living room doorway with the quiet awareness he always had of the rooms he was about to enter, took in the situation, and withdrew, without saying anything, which was exactly right. We watched until the hearing recessed. When the screen cut to a news anchor summarizing the day's proceedings, Lily announced that she was hungry and relocated to the kitchen with the decisive efficiency of someone who had completed an important task and was ready to move on to the next one. I stayed on the couch. Marcus called that evening after Lily was asleep. He confirmed what the day had produced, the committee's preliminary recommendation, the vote that was expected by the end of the week, the institutional responses that were already beginning to move in the way that institutions move when they understand that the record is public and the people reviewing it have authority. He spoke with the same measured calm he always did, and when he was done, he asked how I was. I told him I was all right. It was mostly true. I stayed on the phone with him for 20 minutes. When I finally hung up, Lily was asleep on the couch, where I had left her, one arm tucked under her head, her homework still unfinished on the floor. I sat in the quiet living room and looked at her for a while. I thought about 23 other women who had been asked to prove they belonged, women who had written their accounts down and sent them through the right channels and waited and received letters that told them efficiently and finely that their experience did not rise to the level of action. I thought about where they were tonight and whether any of them had happened to have their television on this afternoon. I hoped they were watching. 3 weeks after a Saturday afternoon, when my daughter sat upright on the living room floor and watched her own voice reach the United States Senate, I was standing at the kitchen counter in my bathrobe at 7 in the morning, waiting for the coffee to finish, when my tablet lit up with a news alert. I picked it up. The airline occupied the top of the page, the lead story on 3 separate outlets, the kind of coverage that arrives when an institution has run out of ways to manage a situation quietly and has accepted with whatever internal reluctance such acceptances require that the public version of events is now the only version available. I poured my coffee and sat down at the kitchen table and read. The termination had been finalized 4 days earlier, according to the filing. The employee in question, identified in the coverage by his role and the gate he had worked, which was enough, had been formally removed following the completion of an internal review process that had been initiated, the statement noted prior to the Senate hearing. The timing of that last detail did not escape me. Institutions have a particular gift for emphasizing the sequence of events in ways that suggest they were already moving in the right direction before anyone required them to. The public statement from the airline ran to 4 paragraphs. The first acknowledged the incident. The second acknowledged the pattern of complaints and the inadequacy of the institutional response to them. The third described the policy changes that had been implemented, new review procedures for passenger documentation, disputes, mandatory supervisor involvement in any boarding delay exceeding 3 minutes, a revised complaint processing system that required a minimum 14-day review period before closure. The fourth expressed, in the careful language of legal counsel, something that was shaped like an apology, without being precisely one. I read all 4 paragraphs twice. I thought about the difference between an institution that apologizes and an institution that changes its procedures, and which of the two actually mattered to the next woman who arrived at a gate with a valid ticket and was made to feel that she did not. The procedures were real. I decided to receive them as such. Lily came downstairs at 7:45 in her school clothes, her backpack already on her hair, in the 2 braids she had decided were her preferred style for the week. She poured herself a glass of orange juice and looked at the tablet on the table with the mild curiosity she brought to most things that were not directly related to her immediate priorities. "Is that about the airport man?" she asked. "It is," I said. She considered this while she drank her juice. "Did he get in trouble?" "He lost his job," I said. She nodded once, the nod of someone filing information in the appropriate category. "Because he was wrong twice," she said. It was not a question. It was the same accounting she had offered on the plane, rendered now with the additional satisfaction of a verdict confirmed. "Yes," I said, "because he was wrong twice." She finished her juice, set the glass in the sink, and went to look for her lunch bag. I sat with my coffee and the tablet in the particular complicated quiet of a morning when something you had hoped for has finally arrived, and you are taking the time to receive it properly, before the day moves on. My phone rang at 8:15. My mother's number. She had seen the coverage. She had been watching for it, not in the anxious way of someone waiting for a specific outcome, but in the patient way of a woman who had lived long enough to understand that truth, once it gets moving, tends to go where it needs to go. She just wanted to know when. Your daddy used to say, she began, in the particular tone she used when she was about to deliver something she had been saving for the right moment, that the truth doesn't need a running start. I could hear the familiar sounds of her kitchen. Behind her voice, the coffee maker, the morning news on low, the particular acoustic of a house that had held a family for 40 years. It just needs someone brave enough to say it first. I sat with that for a moment. He said it to you? I asked. He said it to me in the parking lot of a school board meeting in 1987. She said, when I was thinking about going home instead of going in. He said it, and then he held the door open. A brief pause. I went in. I did not ask what happened at the meeting. I did not need to. I understood that the story was complete. As she had told it, the parking lot, the sentence, the held door, the going in. The rest of it was the rest of it. We talked for a few more minutes about ordinary things. The weather in Jackson, a cousin's new baby, the sweet potato pie she was planning to make for the holiday. The conversation of two people who have said the important things and are resting now in the space between them. When we hung up, I sat for a long scene at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee going cold. David had come downstairs and gone back upstairs. The house had settled into its Tuesday morning rhythm. Outside the kitchen window, the street was doing what it always did. The neighbor's dog making a brief appearance, a car backing out of a driveway, the ordinary machinery of a neighborhood going about its day. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, with her lunch bag found and her jacket on ready for school. She looked at me with the direct appraisal she always brought to adults who were sitting still in kitchens on Tuesday mornings when there were places to be. Then she looked at the tablet on the table, and then she looked back at me. Mama, she said, can we name something after Grandpa? 4 words. Simple, direct, arriving, with no preamble and no particular sense of the weight they were carrying, the way the most important questions always arrive. I looked at my daughter, standing in the kitchen doorway, in her school clothes, with her backpack on, and her braids done, and her lunch bag in her hand, ready to go out into a world that she had already at 7 years old, made incrementally more honest by the act of asking a simple question at an airport gate. That question, 4 words from a 7-year-old, turned out to be the beginning of the hardest and most important 3 months of my life. But this moment ends with me looking at my daughter and saying, yes, baby, we can. 3 months is long enough to build something if you know what you are building and you have the right people helping you build it. What I had known from the beginning was the name. Lily had decided it on the drive home from school, the Tuesday of the question, sitting in the back seat with her backpack in her lap, speaking with the matter-of-fact certainty she brought to things she had already finished thinking through. Grandpa's gate, she had said, because every door should open. I had written it on the back of a gas station receipt and kept it in my wallet for 3 months. It was still there when we pulled into the parking lot of the community center in Jackson on a Saturday afternoon in February, and the building had a covered sign above the entrance, and the parking lot held more cars than I had expected. The room inside was full in the way that spaces become full when people have come because they wanted to, the particular warmth of voluntary presence. Folding chairs faced a small, raised platform. The covered sign was visible through the front windows. Along the side wall, a table held coffee and the particular assortment of baked goods that appears at every community gathering in the South and communicates without announcement that the people who prepared it wanted you to feel at home. David was beside me. May was at the front of the room. Lily had acquired a cookie from the refreshment table and reappeared at my side with the composed expression of someone who understood that today was important and was conducting herself accordingly. Marcus arrived 10 minutes before the program began. He was in a dark suit, and he looked in person, And in this context, like what he had always been, not a name on a news chyron, but a man who had made a promise to someone he loved and had been keeping it ever since. He shook David's hand. He crouched briefly to Lily's level and said something I could not hear. She responded with the solemn dignity she reserved for people she had decided deserved it. He straightened and looked at me. Eleanor would have liked this, he said. I think my father would have liked her, I said. Something moved through his face, brief, unguarded. Then we took our seats. The program was short. A community leader offered opening remarks. The legal partner explained the fund structure, scholarship criteria, application process, the endowment that would allow it to operate in perpetuity, the ongoing passenger advocacy work it would support alongside its educational mission. Then Marcus stood and spoke without notes. He talked about Eleanor directly, without performance. He talked about what she had asked of him and how long it had taken him to understand the full scope of what she meant. He talked about a Monday morning in November at Gate D9 and a woman who had held her boarding passes for 6 minutes while her daughter stood beside her and decided that the truth was worth saying out loud. He looked at Lily when he said that. She looked back at him with her cookie in her hand and gave him a small, definitive nod. The nod of someone confirming a fact they were already aware of. A few people in the room laughed softly. The sound was warm and real. When Marcus sat down, May stood up. She had not been on the program. She simply stood without announcement or apology and walked to the front with her cardigan buttoned and her silver hair and the bearing of a woman who had earned every year she was carrying. She talked for 2 minutes about a man who had put on a jacket and a tie 15 mornings in a row and gone into a building that did not want him there, and who had spent the 60 years since teaching everyone around him that the correct response to a closed door was to find the direction from which it was not closed. Then she looked at Lily. "Come here, baby," she said. Lily set her cookie on her chair and walked to the front with the deliberateness of someone given a task she intends to do correctly. May took her hand and led her to the door, where a cord had been attached to the covering over the sign. May placed the cord in Lily's hand. Lily looked at it. She looked at her grandmother. She looked at the room. She pulled. The fabric fell away. The sign was simple, dark wood, clean lettering. Grandpa's Gate. Because every door should open, Lily read it. Her lips moved slightly, with the words the way they did when she was reading something she wanted to get right. Then she looked up at the sign for a long moment, her small hand still holding the cord, her grandmother's hand still holding hers. May was not looking at the sign. She was looking up past the ceiling, past the roof, past the February sky, over Jackson, Mississippi, with the expression of a woman who had something to say to someone who was not in the room. "You see that, Joseph?" she said quietly. The room had gone still enough that her voice carried without effort. They named it after the thing that couldn't stop you. The guests had gone home. The folding chairs had been stacked and returned. The baked goods had been wrapped in foil and distributed among people who had agreed to take them, which in my mother's community meant they had disappeared entirely within the first 20 minutes of the program ending, which was as it should be. By 9 o'clock, the house was quiet. Lily was asleep in this back room, the same back room she had slept in since she was small enough to fit in the portable crib my mother had kept for years in the hall closet now. In the full bed, sprawled in the diagonal way she slept when she was deeply out, and the world had temporarily ceased to require anything from her. I had checked on her before coming outside. She was holding nothing. Her hands were open, relaxed, resting on the quilt the way hands rest when they have finished their work for the day. My mother and I were on the front porch with the chamomile and the wind chime. In the November street, the same configuration we had occupied 3 months ago, the night after the funeral, when she had told me about a young man in a parking lot who had held a door open in 1987. The chairs were angled the same way. The street was the same street. But the thing we were sitting with was different now. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others, the way things get when they have moved from the category of unresolved into the category of done. I had been quiet for a while, which my mother understood and did not try to fill. Eventually, she said, "You did right by him." I looked at her. "Lily did? Both of you," she said, with the finality of someone who is not interested in false modesty on behalf of other people. "You raised her to say the true thing out loud. That doesn't happen without somebody doing the work first." I thought about that. I thought about all the mornings I had spent in my classroom, teaching 8-year-olds to say what they meant and mean what they said, and how much of that had simply been giving them permission to do what they already knew how to do. I thought about what my father had understood when he wrote that letter, that the courage he was describing was not something you gave a child. It was something you recognized in them and refused to talk them out of. The wind chime turned. I thought about Marcus, who was somewhere between Jackson and Washington, tonight, carrying his folder and his 47 pages and the ongoing work of a man who had been asked by the person he loved most to do something difficult and had decided years after he should have started that late was better than never. I thought about Eleanor, whom I had never met, and felt in some way I could not entirely explain, that I knew the way you know people who leave useful things behind them, whose influence arrives through the channels they prepared before they went. There are people placed in your path at the precise moment you need them, and only later do you understand that the placement was not accidental. I had not been looking for Marcus Webb at gate D9. I had been standing at a counter trying not to fall apart in front of my daughter, doing the quiet, exhausting work of holding yourself together in a public place when everything in you wants to do the opposite. And yet, there he was. And there behind him was the 14 months of preparation he had brought to a morning neither of us had planned to share. I did not think that was coincidence. I had not thought it was coincidence since the plane when I had first allowed myself to sit still long enough to consider the shape of the day. God moves in the particular direction of the people who have made themselves ready to be moved, and I had seen too much that Monday in the airport, on the plane, in the photograph, in the two figures standing at the hand-lettered gate in my daughter's drawing, to believe that the pieces had simply fallen that way on their own. God had been at gate D9. I was certain of that. And God had been at the parking lot in 1987, when a young woman had been standing outside a school board meeting trying to decide whether to go in, and the man she loved had held the door and said the right sentence at the right moment. And God had been in the kitchen of a rented apartment decades before that, when a young man had folded a letter into thirds and addressed it to a granddaughter who had not yet been born, because he had understood in the clear-eyed way of people who have looked directly at hard things and not looked away that she was going to need it. The pages of that story had been turning for a long time before my daughter walked into an airport with a drawing in her pocket. "What do you think he would have said?" I asked. "About today." My mother was quiet for a moment, in the particular way of someone accessing something they have kept carefully. "He would have said it was about time," she said. "And then he would have asked what was for dinner." I laughed. The laugh came from somewhere real, which was the only place his memory ever produced anything. After a while, the street went fully quiet, and the porch light cast its familiar circle, and the wind chime made its small patient sound. And I thought about a morning 3 months ago, and a morning 3 months before that, and a morning 60 years before either, and the long, unbroken line of people who had stood in front of things that told them to stop, and had decided, with whatever combination of stubbornness and faith and love was available to them, to keep going. If you are watching this, and you have ever stood at a gate that told you that you did not belong, I want you to know that the gate was wrong. It has always been wrong. And the people who built the gate have always known, on some level, that it could not hold forever against people who understood their own worth. Share this story if it meant something to you. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And if you have ever had someone stand beside you when it mattered, the way a stranger stood beside a woman and her daughter on a Monday morning in November, tell us about them. That is what these stories are for. My daughter was holding a drawing for a man she would never see again. But she held it like it was the most important thing in the world. Because it was. And because of that, because of her, every door she walks through for the rest of her life will already be a little more open than it was before.